And with that, I'm going to introduce our speaker. We are really excited to welcome back Mike Kentz, who is returning to speak to us after kicking off our series back in 2024. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike and have him introduce himself. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Jessica. Welcome, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Mike Kentz. I am a professor of writing at Fairleigh Dickinson University and also working on building a platform that I'm going to share with you today. And I'm really focused on trying to figure out how to solve some of the assessment problems that we have as educators in the age of AI. And so that's going to be the theme and focus of today's session. We are going to have some polls that go out during this time. We are going to engage a little bit in the chat. And there are also going to be a couple of moments where I actually ask you to engage with some of these bots that I'm going to describe to you. And I also really quickly want to share with you, we're going to put this faculty handout in the chat. This is going to provide some more information. You can keep that on a separate tab. And what we will do is refer back to it a couple of times throughout the session. So hopefully that's a clear enough setup. If you need me to slow down and explain any of that, I can. The focus here is when AI gets in the way, how do we design for struggle in the age of the helpful assistant? And if you're anything like me, this has been a huge problem ever since November 2022, or even a little bit after if students didn't necessarily take it up immediately. And for me, as I've been slowly and sometimes quickly redesigning my assessments, I feel like I can sort of perceive two problems in the area of assessment. The first is that, assessment, I think of assessments as spaces rather than just products. So I think of them as environments and arenas in which our students can demonstrate proficiency and skill. And AI came in a couple of years ago and essentially just bulldozed those arenas. They took those spaces that we used to use to evaluate student thinking and removed them or made them a lot less effective. And that's what's making it so difficult is we don't really have a space where we can reliably, at least in the digital landscape, reliably evaluate student thinking. The other problem that I perceive is that students right now, when they open up AI, I think they see essentially a butler, metaphorically or figuratively speaking. They see a servant that is there to do whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want. That's not entirely their fault, right? It is designed to be a helpful assistant. That is what the marketing and the propaganda is telling us these tools are. But it's a problem for education, right? It's a problem for building cognition, content, knowledge, creativity, communication, and the rest of the things that we want to build while we're in the classroom. So this is going to be the main focus, right? How do we address this issue? And before we move on, I'm going to open up a real quick, I forgot about this slide, I'm sorry. There is, of course, the butler approach, but I think there's three approaches to using AI, three predominant approaches. The butler, do it for me, and then the middle of the spectrum is the thinking partner approach. You're probably familiar with this. I'm willing to bet that if you use AI, you probably do this a lot yourself. In fact, Harvard Business Review published a study last spring indicating that the idea of using AI as a brainstorming buddy was the predominant number one use case of AI. What we're doing, myself and a couple of professors building friction labs, is we're trying to move even further on that spectrum into a space where we use AI as a sparring partner. Instead of saying, help me think, we're going to say, challenge me. We're going to tell the AI and design it to push back, not cooperate. And ultimately what happens in these interactions is that the students have to earn a specific type of outcome. So again, we got the butler, we got the thinking partner, and the sparring partner. I would love to hear from you really quickly. You may not necessarily know exactly where your students are at, but if you had to guess, where do you think they are right now? Are they using AI as a butler, thinking partner, sparring partner, not sure, or some mix? All right. So I think you can all see these results. I'll kind of narrate them in case you're in your car or you're not looking at your screen. 11 out of 57 participants, 19% said that their students are using AI as a butler. 14%, 8 respondents said thinking partner. 6 faculty members said, I have no idea. And 56%, the majority, said some mix of these. And I would generally agree with that last one. I think the students that I have in my Composition 1 class, they tend to be using it as either a butler or a thinking partner. And it sort of depends on the situation. So I appreciate you all sharing that with me. That helps me get a baseline of where we're coming from in our classes and in our student experiences. And what I want to do now, because we're talking about the sparring partner, is actually try one out together. So I'm going to demo this first, and then you will have access in the chat and on your faculty handout to try out a friction bot that I call the faculty room, an AI and education debate. What's going to happen is you're going to step into a chat and you're going to take a stance as it pertains to AI and education. Could be pro, could be anti, could be somewhere in the middle. It's really entirely up to you. And what will happen in this chat is it's going to branch into one of two fictional characters. You're either going to meet David Reeves or Margaret Chen, who you see represented on this screen. Full disclosure, this is an AI generated image. These are not real people. But you're going to meet one of these characters and you're going to engage in what is essentially a sparring session. So let me open it up on my end and demo it for you. And if Julia, if you could put that link in the chat so folks can access it on their end, that'd be great. You can start out with anything you want. You could start out with hello. I'm going to jump right into it and say, I think that AI will make students worse writers and worse thinkers. Taking my stance, putting my thesis in immediately. Okay. Looks like I got Margaret Chen. Pulls out a chair, sits down across from you. I'm Margaret Chen, 22 years in the English classroom, and I think you're dead wrong. Wow. Little spicy. Leans forward, but I'll give you a shot. What's your best argument? Okay, she's willing to listen. Um, let's see. Let's take this in a interesting direction. AI. AI is a very tempting tool for students, to offload their thinking. It is often a more polished writer and will do anything that my student asks for. Therefore, they are likely going to offload the struggle of learning, thinking, excuse any misspellings that are showing up here, thinking, creating, and or writing. Let's see what she has to say. Raises an eyebrow. Okay. Offloading the struggle. We've been saying that about calculator, spell check, and Cliff Notes for decades. Are you telling me every generation before this one always embraced the struggle? Not a bad point. She's definitely pushing me a little bit. What I'm going to do now is actually pause and give everybody an opportunity to open up a chat of your own, take any stance you want on AI and education. You can put that thesis in right at the top, see who you get, and let's go back and forth with it. I don't know, 4 or 5 or 6 times. I'll just kind of be quiet and sit back, and maybe I'll keep doing this chat on my end in case you're not able to access, you can't sit down and do it on a computer, and we'll come back in about 5 minutes, okay? Yeah, I see Tim just mentioned it'd be really nice to be able to speak into the chat, and we are working on that actually, Tim. Thank you for bringing that up. We're really interested in sort of the voice element of some of these types of frictional conversations. So what I'm going to do now, and I hope this is the right amount of time, but I'm going to ask everybody to come on back to the screen. Of course, you can continue playing around with the tool, but I'm going to ask a few questions, and I'd love to hear from you. By the way, it was very hard for me not to get angry at Margaret. I don't know if that happened for you. I ended my last message with, "You may need to brush up on your research there, Margaret." She's kind of coming at me pretty hard. So here's my question for you, if you were able to engage, or if you watched mine, you can kind of use that as a reference. Number one, did you find that difficult? Scale of 1 to 5, 5 meaning yes, it was very, very difficult. 1 meaning it was not hard at all. If you could just put your number in the chat, that would be great. Did you find that to be difficult? 5 is yes, very hard. No, not at all. Okay. I'm seeing numbers across the spectrum, seeing some ones and some twos, threes and fours. Thank you for engaging. Thank you for sharing those numbers. Very, very helpful. And it's good to see where everyone else is landing as well. Ah, Leanne, great point. We're definitely going to get there, and I appreciate you sharing that. Um, Here's what I would like to do. Okay. So I saw some ones and some twos. I actually want you to sort of step back for a second. And I want you to imagine something. Imagine that you finish that conversation and now you have to export the chat that you just had and send it to your professor, send it to your teacher, send it to the educator in charge. They're going to evaluate you on your communication skills, your argumentative skills, also your content knowledge. Do you actually know what you're talking about? Can you back it up? Beyond that, they may even ask you to annotate it. They may ask you to pull that conversation out. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold. Um, Pull it out, for example, into a Google Doc and actually comment along the side and annotate your own chat and say, here's what I was doing here. Here's why I did it. Here's why I took that approach. Here's how I might have done it differently, a little bit like the picture you see on the screen here. And this is ultimately going to be maybe a formative assessment or a homework assignment along those lines, and your teacher is going to grade it. And my question is, and it's going to be kind of hard to poll everybody on this, but if you can, maybe somebody could actually jump off mute even. Does this change the difficulty level at all, knowing that you're now going to be evaluated and the stakes have risen? And I'll just ask, I guess I'll ask for a yes or no in the chat. Does this change the difficulty level? And you can just put a yes, no in the chat. Fair point there. Not enough info. Absolutely. I'm seeing a lot of yeses. As more come in, and yeah, more interesting, right? The debate, all of a sudden it matters, right? I'm going to tell a quick story. When I started doing this with my students a couple years ago, um, this was the moment that kind of unlocked it. Once I started telling them that every message they sent really, really mattered, and I was going to be looking very, very closely, and I started to set a benchmark for them, I saw my students slow down, right? Instead of just like firing off messages, they slowed down. Some of them opened Google Docs and actually drafted their prompt first, edited it, proofread it, and then brought it into the chat. And this happened in a variety of different ways, but um, that raising the stakes, leveraging the grade, changes the psychological approach. It changes the experience, or at least it seems to. And so that has been the successful way of sort of taking that sparring partner approach, again, raising the stakes, and then subsequently looking at it as an actual artifact of student thinking. So the idea here is, of course, we've got the traditional chatbot, which we talked about at the beginning, provides quick, polished answers. A friction bot is going to do the exact opposite. It's going to challenge your assumptions. It's going to resist. It's going to refuse to cooperate. It may even try to trigger you. One of the things that I like to measure with my students is patience, resilience. Are they able to stay calm? Did they get triggered themselves? And it becomes a sort of a mix of measuring their content knowledge and also their human skills. How good are they at navigating this difficult situation? And that transcript, as I've been, excuse me, mentioning, it records it. It becomes a static record of their thinking, their choices, and of course, that content knowledge. And that becomes the thing that you assess. So that was a friction bot. Give me one second. And I love this quote. I love to share this. Carlo Rotella is a professor at Boston University. He just published a book, and I was listening to an interview with him in his promotion for his book. It's about teaching and learning and scholarship of teaching and learning. And he said what's on the screen. The real premium in our world is no longer information. The real premium is friction. It's actually hard to find friction in our world, I would argue. Not just in education, it's just hard, period. Everything is trying to make everything easier. What we can do as educators, and we already do, right? But can we find new ways of producing friction? And that's where the idea of this being called friction labs and friction bots come from. That's what we're producing. Okay, so how am I using this in my class? I mentioned before, this is a Comp 1 class at Fairleigh Dickinson University in New Jersey. So far this semester, I've used it 3 different ways. The first was as a writing diagnostic at the beginning of class. Now, of course, I'm teaching rhetoric and inquiry, so argumentation is the point. And the very first day of class, I explained the concept to them, of course, and we're going to talk about teeing it up and what that looks like. But I had them, if you look on the screen here, they had to make an argument about AI's effect on writing, and a student at the next table, they're at a coffee shop. That's the setting, that's the scene. And a fellow student essentially debates and argues with them. Now, is this a perfect writing diagnostic? No. But what I got to see in a very authentic way was their understanding of what it means to argue, right? What does that even look like? How do you communicate in that situation? And it gave me a nice benchmark before I eventually said, okay, I need a handwritten sample so I can actually see what your essays look like as well. I've also used it for a thesis defense. With a paper that they're working on, they put in their thesis, it turns into a specific character, the character pushes back. But the last thing I wanted to tell you is these don't have to necessarily be character based. They don't have to be persona based or scene based. One of the ways that I've used it is on the screen. It was a fact versus claim checker. So my students had to show that they can discern the difference between a fact versus a claim. This bot was just a gatekeeper. No persona, no scene, no, physical movements or anything like that. No sass, no spiciness, just very, very direct. And they had to paste in claims from articles that we read and then explain why they were claims. If they didn't do a good enough job, the bot is programmed to say, that's too general, be specific. What is the author arguing here? Why can't this be verified? Now I see my student doing a better job of justifying their claim, why they think it's a claim. At the end, as a gatekeeper, it says, okay, that's submission number one, move on to number two, and they can't finish until they've done 3 submissions. So that's how I've been using it in my writing class. Let me tell you a couple more examples. I'm going to come back to that slide. We've done a couple of formal experiments on this. One was in a grade 12 high school ELA classroom at an international school in Switzerland. The number of students, I'm sorry, that's a typo. It should be 21. But a couple of really interesting data points because the idea here was really to help faculty, give them a new way of assessing learning. But what we have found is that students actually enjoy it too. So after we did this with high school ELA students, we asked them whether or not this changed their perspective, approach, or understanding of AI. And 85% said that they had changed their approach as a result of this activity. 47% said they became significantly more strategic in their AI use, and 81% supported scaling this across education. We then went to a graduate program in communications leadership at the University of Washington. Bigger sample size, 48 students, very similar approach, similar questions. 91% of those graduate students became more strategic. And my favorite number of all, 79% of those students supported scaling this, not just in graduate level education, but also in workplace training, employee training, and evaluating, your performance in the workplace, because a lot of those students are mid-career professionals. So we wanted to know how they felt about maybe using this in that situation as well. By the way, the high school experiment is going to be published in an Elsevier book as a chapter later this summer. And I'll be kind of posting about that on LinkedIn and Substack. If you want to follow me, if you want to read the full thing when it comes out, I'll be letting people know about that. Additionally, I just mentioned employee training. I want to present the idea that, yes, this can help us for assessment in higher ed, but what I perceive is that I think industry, frankly, has very much the same problem that we do, and maybe they just don't quite realize it as much as we do yet. Employees are using AI on every training that they do in the workplace. They're using it for, of course, their resume and cover letter. They're also using it for if you give them a case study during the hiring process. They're not going to do that just by themselves. They're going to open up ChatGPT and use it. And I spoke with a friend at a private equity firm, And he hadn't even really considered this. And he didn't really realize that the case studies he's been giving his candidates, the results that they're reading when they come back are probably AI generated in some form. So the idea here is they also have the problem of making thinking visible again. Why does this matter for us as higher ed? I think this is a bridge, the approach that I'm talking about. The simulations, the immersive, challenging simulation. We can create similar assessment procedures and show industry that not only are we sort of updating and finding new ways to make thinking visible, but it's transferable. It's usable in the industry context. It's usable for evaluating candidate thinking, employee thinking, et cetera, et cetera. With that in mind, um, my private equity friend who I mentioned, once I made that point, he said, okay, let's try this out. So we made a simulation just for their situation. They put it in front of a job candidate, and we asked the job candidate to give us feedback afterwards, verbal or excuse me, written. And I loved what she said. This is Holly Pardini. She is a senior at Georgetown University, double major in finance and operation and analytics. Here's what she said. I've enjoyed this a lot more than my class assignments. We've done very simple deal defense assignments, but obviously you don't get live feedback and questioning on your judgment. I like the what if scenarios and questioning my projections. They felt the most comprehensive of everything I've learned about deal and underwriting calculations. She also said very beneficial for real world prep. I feel as though students getting the practice in speaking up and defending your claims against someone grilling you is rare. I love that. It's really a human experience, right? Yes, there's content evaluation, but it's the human skill of holding your ground, being firm with your boundary, patient, resilient, etc. And she also said, I notice more and more participation is forced in my class, and many students are answering questions as a question, not as an answer. Super interesting. So this was another sort of positive signal for us that told us we should keep going. You know, maybe there's something here. Um, so last thing I want to mention before what I want to do is on your faculty handout, there are 5 more simulations. I'll go over to that in a second. But what we have found in our experiments is that it is extremely helpful to give the user a dossier beforehand. I like to think of this kind of like a Mission Impossible dossier. You know, your mission, should you choose to accept it. And the dossier is going to tell you your role, the situation, what you know, what you don't know, maybe even how you're going to be evaluated. And so if you go over, let me get here we go. On your faculty handout on page 2, there's 4 more simulations that you can try out. Conflict resolution, accounting, an audit situation, criminal law, and cybersecurity. In each one, it's the second link down, you can open the dossier and read the situation and then open up the link, have a conversation, see how it feels. And then I would love to kind of bring us all back and chat about it. So with that, I'm going to get out of the way. Again, if you have any questions, please jump in the chat and let us know. But I'm going to get out of the way and everybody take a couple of minutes, pick the simulation you choose, and let's see how it goes. Okay, we got about 20 minutes left, so I'm gonna bring everybody back, and I would love to, let's see, I would love to just gather a couple of reactions, and then I want to kind of demo for you what it looks like on the back end as a faculty member so you can see that entire experience. But you've just had the student-facing experience, and there were some great questions in the Q&A section that I responded to. I don't know if everybody can see them, but if you have a thought, a reaction, a question, I'd love to hear how that felt and what you're thinking. These are all great comments. Love that it felt authentic for some people. Carlos, thank you for that feedback. That is one of the very difficult design questions is how much friction to put in on the back end. And there was actually somebody asked about that in the QA. I can't remember. I think it was Leanne. You know, for some of these simulations, I try to make them a little bit more giving. Some of them I try to make a little bit more frictional. And ultimately, you as the faculty member can decide that. Excuse me. And you can decide, you know, for this one, I want it to be very frictional. The other design question that's really interesting is, do you want the simulation to be winnable? So some of them I approach as treadmills. They just go on forever. And I'll tell my students that the chat is going to end at 7 messages or 10 messages or something like that. because otherwise they'll get carried away. In other cases, you can program in what would be called a win state, sort of video game design. And that gets really interesting because, it gives you a very clear goal. And you can, I'm guessing some people maybe actually achieved that in theirs. I know the faculty room has a win state in it, for example. Um, Mark, I love your point about improv. I feel the same way. I think there are a ton of connections to improv here, which is great for the creativity story. Um, I think this is a way to really get somebody to sort of step outside of themselves. And one of the other ways that I found this to be really effective is to give my students two or three cracks at it. So I'll say, the chat is going to end after 7 messages, but we'll take a break, whatever it may be, but then you're going to jump back in and do it again. And the Georgetown student that I referenced, by the way, she, by choice, without anyone telling her to, she did 3 sessions with the same simulation. And she took a different approach all 3 times. And it was super interesting to read her approach on the back end. Her third one, she actually achieved a win state, which was also really interesting. And the first two, she did not win. So, the improv element, this is subjective. It can go any way. And one of the things, I didn't mention this earlier, but I also tell my students, listen, if you think you did a good job and the bot is still not giving in, don't worry. The final signal on this comes from the professor, comes from the educator, not the bot. The bot is going to be difficult. It might give you a win state and you actually could have done better, but I, as the teacher, the person who grades it, I'm the person who's going to let you know how you did. Because that can sort of help people emotionally regulate a little bit and feel like, okay, I don't have to freak out about how I'm doing because my professor is looking at this and going to give me feedback, and I know that's a safe place. And that is a really very, very effective thing to say to them if they're doing it. Okay. So Shireen just asked a question, which is a perfect segue to demoing the back end of the platform. Again, what you just saw was the student-facing experience. This is what the back end of the platform looks like, and I'll tell you sort of at the end what we're doing here and what how you can get involved, how you can get access. We are still in the R&D phase, so this is very early for us. Here is what the platform looks like. On the left side, you're going to have a couple of things: marketplace, library, assignments, groups, students, sessions, and account. So it's somewhere between sort of the LMS experience and maybe the traditional app experience. Inside of the marketplace, this is where you'll see not only your own bots that you've created, but bots that other people have created and published to the world if you want to co-opt it, right? If someone publishes one that they think is good and they want to share it with everybody, you can add it to your library. So let's see, this is the conflict resolution one. I can preview it here, which is going to take me to that screen where I can test it to see if I like it. I can also we can attach things as you make them, and you can do that as well. So we've got the sample dossier here, or I can just add it to my library if I think it's going to work well in my class. Then I'm going to come over to my library. There's a number of different things you can do here. You can share directly with the student. You can preview, you can launch for yourself. This one was created by me, so you can't edit ones that other people made. You can edit your own though. And this is where the preview section is if you want to try it out. Where it turns into a little bit more of an LMS is in the group section. We're in the early spot here, but what I can do here is I can say comp 1, rhetoric and inquiry. I can describe it if I want, create the group. And when I come in here, I'm going to be able to add my students. I can add which bots I want them to have access to. So you might only want them to have access. You might have a lot in your library and you don't want them to necessarily have access to all of them. Pick the bots you want them to have access to. You can also add your assignments at the bottom. And where I would create my assignments is over here. Going to be pretty similar to some most basic LMSs. Title, select the bot from your library, provide instructions. If I fill this out, then I can actually select which students are going to have access to it. I can schedule it from, Monday to Thursday if I'm assigning it for homework, for example. One of my favorite features here is I can limit the number of messages. So if I don't want them going on and on and on with it, if it is a treadmill bot that goes on as long as I want, I can just have it cap and end sort of hard coded, end at 10 messages. And I find that to be really effective. You can enter your rubric here, save and publish, and send it out to your students, and they'll get access to all that information, which really helps to sort of scaffold the experience so they understand what they're getting into. They can study beforehand if they want to. Um, I've got my students page. These are my Comp 1 students. And then over here in the sessions section, this is where I can actually see what students and folks are doing. So these are the ones that you guys have been doing. These are all anonymous because you guys don't have accounts. So I don't know who is who. Your data is safe. There's no name attached to it. But if someone does have an account, let me get through all of these. Um, sorry for the delay. I can see my student's name, and I'll be able to see their transcript right here. Inside of the transcript, this is a very short one. Let me see if I can find a longer one. Okay, here's the fact versus claim, which I know some people were asking about. Here we go. This is one of my actual students. It's going to go back and forth. At the bottom, I've got two features. One is I can actually generate an AI assessment. So we have an engine that will analyze the chat for you. This might take a couple of seconds, and it's going to produce essentially a report on how they did. Now, of course, AI can be wrong, right? But sometimes if it's a really long chat, I find this to be a useful feature. And it'll tell you why it gave that score for each one. It's going to choose specific categories. If you don't upload it, it'll choose specific categories on its own and give you what it thinks the student should get. And I can also write feedback to my students and send it directly to them via email. One last piece. I saw in the Q&A, a couple people said, well, can't students just use AI to cheat on this or to game the system? We have the ability to see pasted text, and it'll take me a minute to find a transcript where that is. Hope you all can bear with me. I'm teaching and building this at the same time. But you can see if a student copies and pastes text from somewhere else. Now, it won't tell you if it's AI, of course, but that pasted text thing can give you a sense of whether or not that's possibly happening. I have already had a student try to cheat on one of these. And she knew that I could see pasted text, which is really interesting. So, I gave her we just had a conversation. I said, listen, you're not really helping yourself if you do that, but I think it's a nice element to add that academic integrity piece to this process. So that is the demo of the system. As I mentioned before, we are in the R&D phase. And if you go to frictionlabs.io, that's our homepage, and you are interested, we are looking for research partners. We're looking for professors who are interested in experimenting with this. You get free access. You can build your own bot. You can put it out to your students. And what we're really asking for is feedback and iteration. Help us develop the product. Maybe tell us how it went, maybe a short one-page sort of case study. But we need help, right? So that's where we're at right now, and we would love for as many folks to join this movement and this effort as possible. So you can just click that Learn More section if you want, and there's some more information further below about some of the things that I've mentioned. And this is kind of our approach here. Helpful AI is a problem. We think this is a solution. This is a way that we can really deal with the problem. And with that, I think that is all for me. So, yeah, I'll leave this up on the screen, and I'd love to open up for questions.
Thank you so much for your time. This was really interesting. This was a really interactive workshop as well. So that was really, really wonderful to start off our spring series with. As Mike said, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them into the chat. But we do have one about links to the research or surveys to date.
Yeah, so we posted on my blog, we did a preview of the Elsevier study that's going to come out later this summer. That's essentially the only of those of the research that I shared with you. That's the only one. The name of the blog is How We Frame Machines. Sorry, here it is. What happened when we taught AI literacy like writing? Um, you know what? I'll put this in the chat, but the full version of this study will come out later this summer.
Excellent, thank you.
Mhm.
I'm gonna also see, let's see, we just got one. We'll be also sending out ways to connect with Mike through email. At the end of our webinars, we do send an email to our registrants with a recording of today's session, as well as any materials that Mike would like to share along the way. I'm just going to see, I know there are some things popping up in the chat now. I'm going to kind of scroll back through, see if there are other questions that did pop up. Okay. I see one in the Q&A. Yep, definitely. The friction issue is really an interesting one. Absolutely. Okay, I see a question from Rachel. Do you think there's a possibility that what you're remaking could be absorbed under for underneath another platform like a Boodlebox umbrella? So thinking about the different kinds of platforms out there. So eventually looking at like a subscription or different ways of marketing this, what you're working on.
I do think it's possible. Yeah, I think it's possible to build these sort of simulations and personas in a number of different ways. I didn't mention earlier, I'm glad you mentioned Boodlebox. One of the things we're trying to address is the fact that Google Gemini, Copilot, ChatGPT, and Claude, they don't have the ability to immediately view your students' engagements with AI. So you can build custom personas in there, gems, custom bots, etc., and push them to your students, but it's actually very logistically frustrating to see their transcripts. But to Rachel's point, I believe Boodlebox has that capability. What we're trying to do is really be narrow and just do sort of the assessment piece. And I know Boodlebox is a little bit more of a general purpose. So the short answer is yes, I do think it's possible. We're trying to provide a very specific solution to the assessment problem.
Thank you so much. I do see one of our co-collaborators does have a question, so I'm going to let Mike take the floor.
Hey, Mike, thanks for this presentation. It was really fascinating. I put in the chat not just only how to use these tools to generate authentic assessments, but also how we can use AI to create our own custom ed tools. So you may have mentioned this, but I was so engaged with the simulation, I may have missed it. How long did it take you to put together the friction lab? And did you have help from students, that were assisting you as well, or was it just you and your main collaborator? I'm just trying to get a sense of if one of us that were watching this wanted to create something like this, what we would need to think about in terms of the scope of it.
The platform itself you're referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hired a developer to help me because I could not have done this myself. The custom bot part, if you're doing that a lot, you probably recognize you can sort of think through that. But the platform part, I had to hire a developer. I don't know if that answers your question directly.
Yeah, I mean, that's helpful in terms of scope. I mean, it's not a reason for anybody to shy away from trying themselves, but
Right.
it's just useful to know how realistic is it for the masses to develop something like this versus maybe reaching out to some of our CS students in our programs if we have a computer science program.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
hiring somebody on the outside as well.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I do see another question that's just popped in, and kind of thinking about the this kind of being higher ed focused, but what could this look like partnering in a high school setting? How might there be some differences there?
Great question. This actually started in a high school. I was teaching high school at the time, and we are demoing it with some high schools as well. I think You probably would need to reduce the friction and probably have win states for high school students if I were to imagine. I think other than that, though, it's a pretty similar experience in terms of the logistics themselves. Um, and you also, one of the things that I do with my students sometimes, if it feels like they need more scaffolds ahead of time, the research that you'll read, by the way, in the Elsevier, we actually spent 4 weeks teeing up the experience with the AI system. And then what we did is each week we analyzed a different transcript of somebody engaging with the AI and actually broke it down, annotated, and what's going on here, what is this person doing, what's good, what's bad, so that the students, we could actually co-construct the rubric together so that they don't feel like it's a gotcha moment. They don't feel like it's just sort of some vague, ambiguous thing. They were involved in the construction itself. And I think that's particularly effective at the high school level. Um, I perceive at the higher ed level, there's some more constraints in terms of the amount of time you have students in the room and the types of collaborations you can do like that. But, I could be wrong. But that's one thing that worked really well at the high school level.
Awesome. And kind of looking at our last question here, curious about the AI models being used and whether this can be implemented using like a local LLM or something created by, we have a lot of folks who have been working on developing their own LLM. So what that could look like.
Yeah, the default model right now is Gemini 2.5 Flash. When you create your bot, you're able to toggle to a different bot if you want to, or model, excuse me. As for local LLMs, I am not sure. I don't know whether or not you can build this on a local LLM because I haven't built one myself.
Well, excellent. Any other thoughts from our partners at UMBC, UBalt, and Johns Hopkins? This was really insightful. Thank you, Mike. It is wonderful to have you back again. And, it is great to see all the things you've been accomplishing over time. I see Jessica's turned off her camera as well as Mike.
I'll just jump in to say thanks. This was really very thought engaging. I can't wait to go back and talk to some of my colleagues about it. I guess one quick question, can we share some of these links with others at our colleges to allow them to play around with it?
Yeah, please do. Please do. And, like I said, we're trying to get as many faculty involved as possible. So let them know if they want to sign up, they can do that too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you, Mike, for coming back and joining us again. As
Of
always,
course.
it's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Looking at the chat, it seems that a lot of people were excited. We'll be reaching out to you. Again, as a reminder, we will be sending out information on how to contact Mike, as well as the handout that went out today that has all the links to the stuff that you were exploring. And with that, please take a moment to take our exit survey. It's an opportunity for us at Cali to be able to determine how we can continue to improve upon our series and get you speakers like Mike that really interest you. So thank you, everyone.